Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is a user guide for the Nikon Z6 III. Now, if you just purchased one, congratulations. The idea behind this video is to help give you the fundamentals and basics on how to set it up, run through the menu system, and give you what's the most important thing, in my opinion, for how to set the camera, and then set you on your way so that you can go take pictures that you've always wanted to capture. Now, if you're trying to decide if this camera is for you, we have a bunch of different comparison videos as well as a hands-on preview of this in the real world to help you decide if it's for you. But we also have a table of contents down below in the description so that you can jump around to the part of the video where you want to jump around to. But this is going to be a pretty long video. The whole idea is to help you get it set up to get you out into the world shooting. Now, if you find this video as helpful, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, as well as subscribe here on YouTube, because I have a ton of videos that are always coming out to help you be a better photographer. But the first thing we want to do is jump into the outside of the body. As you can see here, the lens is already on the camera. One of the things that most people have trouble with when they first get their mirrorless camera or a DSLR is, well, they're afraid to put the lens on or take it off because they might damage the camera. And the truth is, if you do it wrong, of course you can damage the camera. When you first get the camera is going to be separate. And if you do purchase a lens or you get the kit, the lens is going to be separate. So how do you take it off and put it on? So for now, I'm going to take it off and I'm going to show you what's inside the camera. Right there is your image sensor. This is not what you want to do. You don't want to leave it exposed to the elements at all for any amount of time because dust might get in there. If you touch this, if you damage this, you're basically damaging your camera and it's going to have to go back. So you want to be careful and make sure that you keep the body cap on or a lens on at all times. You don't want this exposed like I'm doing like this. But how do we get the lens on to the camera? We have the lens right here. It has a white dot. On the body, you have a white dot right there. You line both of these up. You have white dot to white dot, just like this. And then you turn it towards you, depending on which hand you're holding, and you hear it snap in. On the side here is the lens release button. You press that in, you turn the lens the other way, and it pops right off with you turning it. Put it back on, here we go, boom, white to white, turn it, done. You are good to go with your lens now on. I know it might be scary, just practice doing it. If it's raining or if it's windy or there's dust around, make sure that you don't get rain in there, you don't get dust in there. Keep the camera lens. This is how I personally do it. You know, take the lens off, turn the camera down like this, line it up, boom, done, quick. Just don't put your finger in there and you're good to go. The next thing to talk about is your battery. The battery goes down here on the bottom. You flip this door open, the battery is already in there. Move this latch, boom. My battery is already in there. Yours is going to be in the box. So how do we put it in? Flip the door open. There's only one way it goes in. Move that little tab out of the way like that. Pop it down, close it, press it. I know it's simple, but it's worth showing you how to do it. Since I mentioned the battery, it's always a good recommendation to have multiple batteries, to have a backup battery, or being that this camera can be charged via USB-C, making sure you have a battery charger with you, one of those portable ones that can charge a phone. If it can charge anything USB-C, it can also charge this battery. But it's a good recommendation to have a second battery just in case something miraculously goes wrong with the first battery. So that's basic. Now, memory cards. There are 2 memory card slots in this camera. Right here, we pop this door open. Oh, and guess what just happened? The door did not flip all the way. Why is that? Because of a design issue that Nikon has right here. You see this right here? This is in the way. If I move that out of the way and I flip the door, oh, look at that, it flips right open. We've told Nikon about this and they haven't done anything about changing it. Maybe they will in the future. You have 2 card slots here. You have an SD card slot, which is right here. Boom, that's the smaller one. You have a Compact Flash Express B slot, which is right here. As you can see, it's real simple to put a card in. You press it in, boom, pops out, press it in, locks in. Same thing, press in, pop out, and it's that simple. Close the door, latch it in, and it's basic. I shoot with 2 memory cards because I like to shoot what's called redundant, where I have file saving to both of those cards just in case something happens. You don't need to have 2 cards in the camera to shoot. We use a card from a company called ProGrade Digital. They make SD as well as CF Express B cards, which are perfect for your cameras. They're fast, they're affordable, they are pretty reliable, so I like to use 2 just in case, because we know with computers, anything can happen, and you want to take as many precautions as possible with your images to make sure you don't lose them. And with that being said, you want to make sure that you are buying from reputable places. There's Allen's Camera, there's B&H, there's Adorama. I'm not a big fan of buying memory off of Amazon because sometimes in the past there has been counterfeit memory, and you just don't want to buy that. You want to buy from reputable brands and reputable stores to get the best cards. You don't want to ruin your images because you bought a crappy card. Now that we have cards in the camera, battery in the camera, we have a lens on there, I want to quickly show you how you should hold a camera. The proper way to hold a camera in this day and age, and honestly most days and ages, tuck the elbows in, your eye goes up to the viewfinder, your left hand goes underneath the lens, your right hand goes right here onto the grip on the side to press a shutter button, and you go like this. This is not how you shoot pictures. I know a lot of people are coming from cell phones. I don't recommend you do this. I don't recommend you shoot like this. If you have a viewfinder, electronic viewfinder, which is this, we shoot through it, you tuck your elbows, it's more stable. We'll get to other things with the flip out screen in just a minute, but it is important that you hold the camera properly. You don't put your hand over the top like this. You put it underneath like this, tuck your elbows, and you're good to go when it goes to shooting. How do we turn it on? Look, on, off. There's a switch right here. Boom, it's right by the shutter button. You go to on, you go to off. Simple, on, easy. Right here is your shutter button. This is the big black button right here. You can press it halfway down to focus, press it all the way down to take the picture. You have your record button. Now, remember, most of these buttons are custom buttons that we can adapt and change in the menu system to do different things. If we don't want it to be the record button, it could be something else. So you have all of those different options. That's record. This is your ISO button. This is your exposure compensation button. Again, you can map all of those out. Now, staying with the top of the camera, we have a dial right here that you can rotate. This is going to change your shutter speed when you are changing your shutter speed in the camera. On the front of the camera, there's the dial right here below where your finger will go, where the shutter button is. This is going to control your aperture. It's real easy to do. You just move your finger left, you move your finger right, and now you're controlling your aperture. So coming back to the top of the camera, we have a light here. You would press this button and it would activate a light on this screen. You have a small LCD screen on the top of the camera. There's information there, as you can see when I turn the camera on. I rarely go to this screen, and basically rarely means never, because everything is either on the back of the camera or inside of your electronic viewfinder. Speaking of electronic viewfinders, this is the electronic viewfinder right here. This is an electronic viewfinder. Think of it like a little TV screen. If you photographed back in the day and you looked through the camera and you saw what was right in front of you, that was what was called an OVF, or an optical viewfinder. Now it's like a little TV screen. It's amazing. It doesn't flicker and hurt your eyes like the old ones back in the day. You shouldn't get a headache when you're looking through it. This has a fantastic electronic viewfinder. Right above the viewfinder, you see this little opening. That is a proximity sensor. So when I put my finger up against this proximity sensor, or your forehead goes up against it, you can see that the LCD screen goes off and the EVF does go on. If you ever get any dust or maybe a little raindrop on there, and you might be like, well, why is it not switching back to it? That's because it's being blocked from there. All right. Turning off the camera again, we have your LCD screen. This is your LCD screen. It flips out and rotates. You can flip it. You can close it like this when you're traveling, so you can have a little bit of protection on it. I guess I do close it. If I had it, I would close it. But then when I'm shooting, you flip it open, put it back like this. You have other options where you can flip it and hold it above your head. You can hold it below the, down low, so you can flip back and shoot this way. There's all different ways that you can do it, so just keep that in mind. It's a flip out, rotatable screen, or you could of course go selfie style, and you could be like talking to the camera just like this, and your information would be on the flip out screen over there. Now, for those of you who shoot with glasses on, I wear glasses, but I don't shoot with glasses on because I like to get my eye all the way up into the viewfinder. Now, there is a diopter on the side right here. This diopter allows you to dial it in to see if the EVF is sharp for you by just moving an optic back and forth. The best way to see if it's sharp is you just go to the menu, you would hit menu on the back of the camera, look through the viewfinder, and you would just twist, you pull this knob out. It's hard for me to show you on camera, but you pull that knob out, and then you can rotate forward and back until it looks sharp. Once it looks sharp, press the button back in, it locks it in, and now your EVF is perfect for your eyes. If you find yourself taking it out of the camera bag and it's not sharp, just check to make sure that this diopter didn't get pulled out and then rotated to change your settings. So just lock that in. Since we're at the top of the camera, right here, this is your hot shoe. This is not a digital hot shoe. Other companies make digital hot shoes, meaning you can plug a microphone into the top without having to put any cables into it. But this is just a regular hot shoe. This is where you would put your flash. You could put a microphone up here and then run the cables into the side of the camera. And I will show you where that goes in just a second. Top of the camera, when you first get it, you have your PSA and M over here, which stands for, you've got manual is M, aperture priority, shutter priority, P mode, which we like to call pro mode back in the day, but it's really program. It's basically full auto, but gives you a little bit more control. But green, that says auto, is basically full auto. That is going to let the camera make all the decisions for you and let it do it. I'm not a big fan of full auto, and that's why I recommend getting out of it, but I have other videos for that, which you can check out my channel. U1, U2, and U3 are user set settings. So if you want to say, oh, well, I like to photograph sports, so I need this setting, and I like to have it be that way, you could set it for that. You could set one for portraits, and you would just turn to that and would bring up the settings for those that you already preset in the camera to make it much easier to bounce from one to the next. There is also a button on the side of the electronic viewfinder right here. You would hit this button and that would say, I don't want the LCD screen to ever come on, and you could just go through the different buttons by pressing it and it will turn off the screen or turn off the electronic viewfinder, but you can cycle through those different modes right there. Since I mentioned these little latches here, this is where you would put your lens strap. They're off to the side. The camera comes with a lens strap. That's where you would hook it on. Now let's move around to the ports. Since I already mentioned that you have where the microphone goes, and it's not a digital hot shoe, you would then be able to, you would have to plug the microphone into the camera. Where do you do that? This little thing right here says mic. This says headphone jack. So you would just flip this out of the way, open it up. You would plug your microphone into here. And if you want to monitor the audio, you would plug the audio, your headphones, right into there. We seal this up to give it a little bit better in terms of weather sealing. In case you're out in any kind of the elements, you want to make sure that any place that water could get in, you don't want it to get into. This right here is for a plugged-in remote. You've got HDMI, which is a full HDMI now, and then you have USB-C. When you go ahead and plug into the USB-C to charge your camera, you will see a light come on the side. I believe that it's orange, and when it's fully charged, it should switch to green if my memory serves me correct. So that is the side of the camera here. Flipping over to the bottom, of course, we have the battery door and we have our tripod mount right here at the bottom. If you're going to put a tripod, a plate right here, you would put your plate right here, pop it into the camera. Or if you're shooting with a monopod and you have a small lens, you're going to put it here, but generally, if you're going to use a monopod with a big lens, you would put the monopod into the lens. Flipping around to the front of the camera, we already showed you right here, which is your lens release. You have an LED light right here that will come on and be annoying. That's to help with focus, but I turn it off because it's like, hey, look at me, I'm taking pictures, and it really is kind of useless. It only comes in handy in super low light situations, but it's unnecessary and more of a distraction. So I will show you how to turn that off in the camera when we get into the menu. Over here, you should be able to see some of these function 1, function 2 buttons. They're programmable to do different things. So if you want to maybe change ISO by pressing this and holding it in, you could. There's a lot of different custom settings you could use right for that. I already talked about the LCD screen. Now flipping around to the back of the camera, of course, this is your LCD screen. This is a touch screen, so I can show you in the menu. I could just click here, touch my finger on it, and it's going to allow you to touch it. It's a touch screen. I don't recommend you use the touch screen to take pictures, but there is an option to do that. Starting with the top left of the camera, we have a button right here that you press that's going to allow you to go through the different frames per second. So when you click on this, it could be single shot, or you would be able to change to multiple shots from that. We've got our trash can button, which when you press the trash can button, what happens, Steven?
Oscar the Grouch comes out.
That's right. I've never used that joke before. Or that joke before. I've used it 73 times, but Oscar the Grouch. Anyway, that's how you can delete photos in the camera. I still don't recommend deleting photos in the camera. There's really no reason to do that at this juncture. Moving over here, this is where you have a switch to go from, right now it's in camera mode. For stills, you would switch there to switch into video mode. You have, I'm gonna switch it back. You have a display right here. That's gonna change, when you press display, it's gonna change information on the back of the screen. We have an AF on button, which is mappable. You can change this, but this is, some people do back button focus. I personally don't recommend doing that, but you do have the option to do AF on, which means you're controlling your autofocus. You have a joystick with knipples right here. You would go up or down or left or press it in to hit the OK. That's one way you could do it. Info button, that's going to bring up info screen on the back of your camera. We've got an OK button, which is like, it's not OK Go like the band, but you press that and that is like your return button or enter button with your camera when you want to change something. You have your D-pad, up, down, left, right, BA, select, start. You have your magnifying glass to zoom in on images. You have your magnifying glass to zoom out on images, but you can see there is a secondary option right there. That means if you hold another button down, 2 buttons in combination to get to that, it has a secondary function that is available. Menu button brings up the menu, and of course, your playback button is down here in the bottom right-hand corner. You would hit playback to get through and preview your images. And that, my friends, takes us around the outside of the body. And yeah, that's really it for the outside of the body. Now we're gonna jump into how to set up the camera, starting with the basic menu functions. Let me jump in here real quick because I wanna show you our Lightroom presets from FroPack 4 in action on this photo taken with a Nikon Z6 III. Let's come over here and start with Brooklyn. We've got C41, which gives it that awesome filmic look. We've got copper tone, high C, kaleidoscope, saltwater taffy, thick, and wet, hot American summer. But I want to show you something that's exclusive to FroPack 4, X1, X2, X3, and X4. I'm going to hit X3, which is eyes only preset. It goes in, it picks up the eyes, and boom, they look great. So if we go over here to the mask, we can click on iris, and right here you have an amount slider, which allows you to change it. You could do less or you could do more until you find what you like. So look, if you want to speed up your raw workflow, give yourself a great starting point, or you want to support this free content that we're creating, we created 14 all-new custom Lightroom presets that you can check out right now at FroKnowsPhoto.com/FroPack4. While you're over there, you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters, and if you decide to pick them up right now, they are currently on sale. Or if you want to get the Grand Slam bundle that includes FroPack 1, 2, 3, and 4, you can save even more. And don't forget, these work on mobile, whether you shoot RAW or JPEG. Now, let's get back to the video. Now it's time to jump through the menus, but before I do that, I want to let you know that I'm using what's called an Atomos recorder. This allows me to show you exactly what we're looking at in the menu so that we can play it back on the screen. So you can touch the screen, the LCD screen, to change your menu system. I can also do that right here on the back as well, but it's much easier for me to look at this screen and share the information with you directly, so that's what you will see in this frame. So the first thing we're going to make sure in our camera is that we're going to take it off of auto and put it into manual. Manual unlocks all of the menu system. If you leave it on auto, you are basically giving up all the control, or the majority of the control, to the camera, and you can't make as many tweaks or changes in the menu system. I personally like taking control of my camera. I think it's okay to start off in full auto when you first get it, and then for a couple of days or something, shoot that way until you want to venture out of auto. I'm a big proponent of getting out of auto, so I'm going to show you how we set this up by getting into manual, then hitting the menu button, which I already did, to get the shooting menu up on the screen. So I'm going to do the best that I can to go through as many of the menu settings as possible. Some I just gloss over from time to time because they're really meaningless and they're not ones that I actually change and might not recommend that you change or tweak. But if you come upon anything in the menu and you're not sure what it actually means, you see this question mark that pops up in the top corner. If I hit that question mark, it then explains to me what the camera or what the setting actually does. So it's like a built-in user guide, even though I'm going to be the user guide that delineates this stuff to you, but you have more information here in case you want to know more about what each setting means. So if you see the blinking question mark, you can learn more. All right, first things first, we're starting with this green menu, which is the photo shooting menu. You can see this as reset photo shooting menu. We haven't set anything yet. I'm starting fresh, blank, as if the camera was brand new, reset from scratch, so there is nothing to reset right there. You've got your storage folder option. This is not something that I change. I leave it to the exact setting here. It's Nikon, or NZ6 III is what Nikon already has it set to. And you can change the folder number, or once you go past 9,999, it will then go up to folder 101. You can play around here. You can change the file number if you really want to. I don't do that. I do that when I get it into the computer, into Lightroom. I will make the change and rename everything from there. File naming, we've got DSC, or above that was for the folder. The file naming is right here. This is normally what Nikon's come in as. It can show you right here that it would look like DSC_1234. I sometimes change this to JP, which are my initials, Jared Polin, and then maybe 1. And then after I go through 9,999 images and it changes, I go to JP2, and so on and so forth. And you can see that it is not a QWERTY keyboard, which I don't understand why it's not a QWERTY keyboard, but they don't have QWERTY for some reason. So that's how you would go ahead and change that. File naming isn't something you really need to change that often unless you're taking a ton of pictures and you're doing a bunch of different photo shoots and you don't have time to rename it after the fact. You can start with file naming in the camera. We've got primary slot selection. If we go into here, now it's showing you two options. You've got CF Express / XQD. The reason they mention XQD, that is a format that is the same exact shape as CF Express type B cards. It's older and not really sold anymore, but the older cards would still work in this camera. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not as fast as the current cards, but they still are available. I personally wouldn't use them. I would stick with the CF Express cards. You also have the SD card slot as well. So we're saying primary card slot selection. That means if you have SD and you have CF Express in there, it would go right to the CF Express and leave the SD blank. Now, we have secondary slot function. This is important because right now it's set to overflow, which means it would, if you filled up your CF Express B card slot, it would then overflow the next images to the SD card. This is so old school for when cards were really tiny and you only had like 128 megabytes and you might go over it. It's not something that I use. I personally like to use backup. Backup means that whatever is saved to slot A or slot 1 is also saved to slot 2 or B. So backup is what I prefer because if something happens to one of the cards, at least I still have a backup there. RAWs are going to both cards, JPEGs would go to both, but there are options where you could do RAW to one card and JPEG to secondary, or JPEG primary and JPEG secondary if you did different sizes. You have a bunch of different options, but generally speaking, I stick with backup myself so I can shoot with multiple card slots. Next up, we have image area. Now, when we go into image area, you can choose your image area. Right now it's on FX. FX means full frame. You do have the option to do a DX crop mode, which crops in so you're not using the full width or the full size of the image sensor. You've got 1:1, which makes it a square, and then you've got 16:9 aspect ratio, which no one in their right mind really will ever shoot photos for. Keep in mind, right now we're setting it up for photos. The next icon down on the left-hand side under the green camera, well, that one is for video mode. We'll get to that when we finish this. I shoot in full frame or FX. If you were to put on one of Nikon's DX lenses onto this, which is a cropped sensor lens meant for crop sensor cameras, it would automatically crop it down to the DX mode so that you can use the lens. I'm a big proponent of using the full frame lenses on here, but the crop sensor lenses would work if you wanted to. I should also mention that if you do shoot RAW and you say decide to shoot 1:1 on the camera, well, you would still actually have all of the data there, the RAW data. We'll get to that when I set the RAW versus JPEG, but you will still have all of that data there so you can get rid of the 1:1 and get all of that extra information that was captured on the side. But if you shot JPEG 1:1, it would always be 1:1 and you would never ever have that data outside of it because it already got thrown out. So FX is the way to go. Next up is tone mode. It's set to SDR. You have the option for HLG. Now this really only affects if you're going to shoot in HEIF mode, H-E-I-F. I personally will not shoot in that. I like to take full control of my camera. So this is a mode that I stay out of altogether. We've got image quality. When you first get your camera and you get out of auto, it's going to be on normal. Normal, as you can see, is not exactly the highest quality possible. Personally, I like to shoot RAW, just straight up RAW. For those who don't know what RAW is, you've got RAWs and you have JPEGs, and of course now you have HEIF, which is another file format, but we'll stick with RAW and JPEG for now. A RAW file is all of the data that the image sensor is capturing. It's capturing it all and sending it right to the memory card and not making any changes to it. It's not being overly compressed. It's not throwing out any data. You are getting the raw data, which is what I personally like to shoot in. It's a larger file, there's more quality, but you do have to edit every one of these files in the computer after the fact. Now, JPEGs are compressed files where the camera takes the raw data and based off of the settings in your camera will throw out certain information it doesn't think it needs or that you need and make it a smaller compressed file. So whereas a RAW file might be 24 megabytes or 26 megabytes in your camera, the JPEG may be 6, 7, or 8. So you can see you have a lot less data. But that file is already done, it's cooked, so it's ready to be put out into the world. But think of it like if you save over a photocopy or you make a photocopy of something back in the day, and then you make a copy of the copy and a copy of the copy of the copy, you start to lose quality. JPEGs are lossy files. You are going to lose information the more you save over them. RAW files, the raw ingredients, you always have the raw ingredients to go back to. You just hit reset in Lightroom and you go back to the raw file and all of your other changes have been thrown out and you can start fresh once again from the raw ingredients. So personally, I leave it set to RAW. If you're new to photography, you might want to go ahead and set it to RAW plus JPEG fine, so you get the best of both worlds. You may not know how to edit the RAW files yet, but you can save those for the times where you might be extremely off with your exposure. We have videos about showing the differences between RAW versus JPEG, but RAW files with more data tend to have the ability to be edited much more, and if you're off with your exposure, you have a better chance of getting the image back with better quality than you do if you tried to edit a JPEG file that was off. So personally, at the beginning for you, RAW plus JPEG fine, until you start to learn how to edit your RAW files, then you don't have to worry about shooting those JPEGs any longer. Or for someone that needs to turn a file around quickly and the exposures are pretty close, you can send those JPEGs out into the world. So I would personally set it to RAW, but you guys can figure it out for yourself which you would like to do. One other thing I should mention before we bounce out of here, you see where it says JPEG/HEIF? As you saw, I was in the SDR, you had those options for that. If you're in the HLG, it's gonna default over to that HEIF. So I mean, I'm still just a JPEG. If you're gonna shoot JPEGs, or I'm not a HEIF shooter, I don't know many people that are shooting with the HEIFs at this point, but if you were in those modes, that's when you would go ahead and use HEIF. Next, we've got image size settings, and because I'm set to RAW right now, it's not going to allow me to get into that menu, but so I'll go RAW plus JPEG, fine, and you can see that image size now pops up because this is for controlling the JPEG files. So we've got image size large, medium, small. I am a big proponent of always shooting the largest, best quality file because you can always dumb down, you can't dumb up. So keep that in mind. So we've got that on large. We've got enable DX image sizes. I do not want that. And image size DX, if we were to put on a crop sensor lens, you can see that it's a smaller file size, 10.6 megs. You would then have the large if you put on a crop sensor lens on here. But for now, image size large, and I have the enable DX image size is currently off. So we'll get out here. RAW recording. So RAW recording, there's a bunch of different options you have today. You've got high efficiency, which is going to be a compressed RAW file. You've got another high efficiency, but with the star next to it means that it's even better quality than the other one. And then you've got lossless compressed. So these are lossy files, meaning they're losing something, but they're still RAW, and they'll give you a smaller file. But then you have lossless compressed. So this is a compressed RAW file, but you are not losing any data. Think of it like a zip file where you zip something up, and then when you unzip it, you have the same exact thing, and you didn't lose anything. That's what lossless compressed is. I personally, if I'm shooting RAW and the camera gives me only this option of lossless compressed, I'm gonna shoot in lossless compressed. You can't dumb up, but you can dumb down. So right there, we're gonna do lossless compressed. Next up, we have ISO sensitivity settings. For those who might be new to photography, and if you already know this, bear with me for just a second. ISO is like your film speed. Back in the day, you had 100, 200, 400, 800 speed film. And they used to say, if you're in a bright area, 100 speed film will be fine, or 200 speed film. If you're gonna shoot action, you wanted faster film. So nowadays, with digital, we have ISO sensitivity settings, which you can change right inside of the camera. So one picture could be at 100 ISO, the next picture could be at 3200 ISO. The higher the ISO, the more, you think of it being in a lower light situation is when you start to bump that ISO up higher. But as you go up higher in ISO, you might introduce more noise and grain. So if you can keep it lower for the situation you're shooting in, it might be more advantageous for you to do so, but a lot of it still comes down to, am I shooting something fast or am I shooting something slow? Generally speaking, if you're shooting something fast, you want a faster shutter speed, which means you might have to raise that ISO a little bit. I know that went in a little deeper, but right now you can see ISO sensitivity. You have all of these different options, 100 all the way up to, we'll get to that. What actually, let's take a look right now what it goes up to. Is it 25,600? It is, no. It's, whoa, it goes up to 64,000 now, not 51,200. And then you also have H, which is high 0.3, and you also have low. I want to explain those. Those are generally not recommended by Nikon. The engineers say 100 ISO is our base ISO. This is where we think that we're happy with the image settings. You can go low. I've never seen issues with it, but I generally stick with the ones that aren't part of low or high. So that's if we're gonna set it ourselves. Now, auto ISO sensitivity control is currently on, meaning, let me show you this. Let me bounce out here. We see the bottom corner where the ISO auto is blinking. It says 6400, sorry, that's 64,000 ISO, and auto ISO is blinking. Let me take the lens cap off real quick. And you see how the number is changing? Like if I point it at this light, it's gonna drop lower because wow, it went to 100. But if I point it into a dark area, it's gonna go all the way up. Right now it's at 40,000 to light up this really, I mean, all the lights are off here, so it's turning the ISO sensitivity up. So I just wanna show you that's what auto ISO is doing. It's making the choice for you, even if you change the shutter speed, aperture, or just the shutter speed and aperture. The camera's automatically gonna compensate and change for you based off of your settings. So auto ISO is a very good place for people to start at the very beginning. It's not always perfect, but it is a great place for you to start at the very beginning. Personally, I turn off auto ISO once you're comfortable with that, and then I control it myself. But the other settings right here, you can do maximum sensitivity. If I don't want to go as high as 64,000 ISO because I don't like the quality, I want to limit it to say 40,000, the auto ISO would obviously not go as high, won't go past 40,000. We've got maximum, we're not worrying about the flash. We've got minimum shutter speed is another thing that we could do. We could be like, well, we don't want the shutter speed to go below X. Right now, I leave that on auto, but like I said, I'm not shooting auto ISO, so I personally turn it off, in which case, we come to the outside of the camera. I can show you how to make these changes when you're shooting. You have an ISO button right here at the top of the camera. You hold down the ISO button, and you can see that it lights up yellow inside, where I would turn this back dial with my back thumb, and I'm dialing it higher by going to the right. Now I'm at 400, 500, 640. If I want to turn it down lower, I turn it down to 100 by going the other way with the dial. Now, if you see if it still says auto ISO and you don't want to dive into the menu to make the change, it's simple. Hold down ISO button, and the front dial for your front finger, which is below the shutter button, you turn that to the left or the right, and you can see that ISO goes on or off just from turning that. That's something that I had to figure out, or a lot of people have to figure out when they first start shooting, is that how do I get out of auto ISO if it's in it without diving into the menu? And if you want to dive into it quickly, you just hold ISO down, you turn that front dial, now you're in auto ISO. So that's that for ISO. So that's auto ISO. We've got white balance. White balance is set to auto currently, auto 1. Okay, I need to take a step back for those of you who might not know what white balance is. It's the camera is trying to set the balance of light where you're shooting. If you're outside in a bright day and the sun is out, the color temperature might be one thing. You come inside and it's a little cooler inside in terms of the light, then it's going to set the ISO to, set the white balance to something else. You can see you have natural light, auto, direct sunlight, cloud. You can make the change if you want. I generally leave it in auto ISO unless I'm using the flash, and in that case I know what the lighting color temperature is that I want to be. So for auto is usually pretty good. You have auto, you could do keep white, which is reduce the warm colors. You could keep the overall atmosphere, which is the one that I like to do, or you could keep warm colors. Now keep this in mind, when you shoot JPEGs, you are baking in the white balance. It's going to be a little harder to tweak it after the fact, but you still can tweak it with the JPEG. But with the RAW file, you can jump between any of the white balances after the fact, because you have full RAW control to go back into the original file, and it's not baked in there at all. So that's one of the things that you need to make sure that you know, is that it's baked in. So if you make it cloudy or incandescent, but you're shooting in regular sunlight, your color might be off on your screen. But if you're in full auto, the camera is going to make all the choices for you. So that is white balance. Picture control is very important. Right now it's set to auto. So auto means it's going to change between whatever situation you're in. The camera's going to be like, oh, I might be shooting something vivid, so it's a landscape, and it's going to set a certain picture style. Picture control is very important, because if you get your picture control wrong, you go in there and you tweak your settings and you're shooting JPEG, your file is baked. Meaning, if we go in there and shoot monochrome, for example, we can go to monochrome. And if I take off my lens cap right now, you're going to see the world in black and white. Right here. Everything, let me go back into auto ISO, just so it can do this, but we can see the world is now in black and white. If I was to take a picture like this and I was only shooting JPEG, I would only get the black and white monochrome. I would not have any other data. But if I go ahead and I shoot RAW and I shoot it in monochrome, you'll still see the preview on the camera as in monochrome. But after the fact, if you don't want it in monochrome anymore because you shot in RAW, you hit reset in the computer and the color data all shows up. Like you're watching Pleasantville, the movie. I love that movie. That's a good movie. So you get back into the color. So you would use vivid if you want vivid colors. Now with RAW, you can change all this later because you can take full control of your file. But it's very important that you understand that your picture styles, your picture control is going to affect your images as well as your video. So if you shoot monochrome video, you're only going to get monochrome video. So generally speaking, standard is a good place to go. Personally, what I like to do I go to standard on mine. It's not going to affect your RAW file. So whatever you set here, like I said, isn't going to affect your RAW file. But if you went and you raised your sharpening all the way up and took a picture of anybody and they're over sharpened, you can't bring it back in the JPEG. You can try and make some tweaks, but you over baked it and there's nothing you can do. Whereas with the RAW file, if you over sharpened it, it doesn't matter because all the raw data is there. We strip it out. So personally, I don't change sharpening at all, but I go through and I might bump contrast up 1, not brightness, and saturation 1, and that's it. And then I hit the OK button to lock that in. And that star next to the SD means that you made a tweak to it. I do that just so that the preview of my image on the back of the screen mimics what my RAW file might look like. It's not just going to be flat and boring. It's going to have a little bit of control there, a little bit of look to it. Next up, we have Manage Picture Control, which you can save and edit some of the picture styles or the picture controls that you change. Now, this is important because this camera has added something which is different than what it normally has. You see we're at flat, but look at this. We've got creative picture control. You can have a dream looking thing, morning, pop, Sunday. Where's Friday, Steven? Where's Friday? It's Friday. Anyway, you got somber, which I thought meant sober, you know, because in case someone's drunk, you take a picture of them and it makes them sober. Dramatic, silence, weird. Bleached, melodic. What's that say? Alcoholic? No, that melancholic. What? This is the mode that the Smashing Pumpkins start playing when you start playing this mode. Pure, denim, toy, sepia, blue, red. Oh my God, there's so many different options. If you bake this stuff in, you're gonna regret it. I'll just tell you that. But you could go in here and select it and then tweak it and then save it to those custom settings. This is not something that I want to ever touch or recommend that you ever touch. But if you're into the Instagram look and you're into filters, you could create your own, you could tweak your own, you could save your own, and this is where you would do it. Personally, I'm leaving it in standard the way that I set it. So that's Manage Picture Control, Set Picture Control, HLG. That's if you were gonna shoot in that other mode that we talked about, but we're not. Color space, I personally leave on sRGB. You have other options like Adobe RGB, but sRGB is where I always leave it. Interesting that active delighting is off. Usually they automatically put this on. This only affects your JPEGs. It helps brighten up certain areas in the image where the camera is doing some work, and then it saves the JPEG. I leave active delighting off. Next up is long exposure noise reduction. If you're gonna be shooting at 30 seconds or around that time or longer, more noise gets introduced the longer the exposure happens. I personally leave this off because I'm shooting RAW anyway, and I don't want anything baked in to, well, nothing's gonna be baked into the RAW file, but if you shoot JPEG, it would be baked in. I wouldn't do it. High ISO noise reduction, you've got normal, low, off, as well as high. I personally turn this off. If you shoot at higher ISOs, you tend to get more noise and grain, but what high ISO noise reduction does is it gets rid of the noise and grain, but it kind of makes it look like a watercolor painting, so I personally leave that off. Vignette control, I turn this off as well. That's for around the edges. It might be darker depending on the lenses that you're using, and then this would make a change to that and maybe brighten it up. I leave that off. That's something I can do after the fact in the computer. Next up, you have diffraction compensation. These days, back in the day, I would tell you to turn this off, but these days, there's a lot of lens profiles and camera profiles that are meant to give you the best of the best with honors results from your lens. So this is something, diffraction compensation, I leave on. Auto distortion control, why can't I click on this? Let's hit the question mark. Auto corrects for peripheral distortion, requires a CPU lens with, oh my God, this is too much. Right now it's on, we have to leave it on. Skin softening is not something that I'm turning on. Again, affects your JPEG, I leave off, but there's so many different options, low, normal, high. For those people that want to maybe do that for portraits, I leave it off. Portrait impression balance, I also leave this off. Next up, photo flicker reduction. This is Good to use if you're in a place that has a lot of flickering lights, maybe flickering screens. This will help take pictures when the flicker isn't actually happening. You would shoot on the flick or the or whichever way that it goes. And this is just something that you just have to get used to turning on in certain situations. You could leave it on all the time, but that might slow down your shooting ever so slightly. You probably won't notice it, but it's really meant for situations like gymnasiums where there's those old school lights that get a lot of flicker. Now, if you're in a new area, a type where you're shooting with really fast moving lights like at a concert venue or LED boards, you might want to get into high frequency flicker reduction. You do have this where you can fine tune it with the shutter speed to get middle ground. So instead of shooting at say 1/1000th of a second, it might shoot at 1/975.463 of a second. It's to help get the flicker under control from LED lights today. Let me jump in here real quick and say, would you like me to send you a free guide to capturing motion in low light situations? If you said yes, just head on over to FroKnowsPhoto.com, look for this orange box, put your name, email address in it, hit send it. I'm gonna send you that guide for free. Metering really doesn't matter as much anymore because with the electronic viewfinder, you are seeing your exact exposure in your eye. We'll get to that when we get to that setting. But for metering modes, I'll just read what they are. You've got matrix metering, which is taking the brightest and darkest in the scene and then giving you right in the middle. Center weighted, we don't use this stuff anymore. Spot metering, again, we don't use. Highlight weighted metering, it's another thing that we don't worry about because the cameras have gotten so good that the exposures are right there in front of your eye. You can see when it's right and you can see when it's wrong. Generally speaking, I'm leaving it in matrix metering at this point. We don't have a flash on the camera. It's not built in. You would put one on the external. So flash control is not high lit. You have different flash mode options right here. Red eye reduction, rear curtain sync, and flash off. That's if you put a flash up top. You can do flash compensation. Nikon really puts a ton of stuff into each of their menus. Some of the other camera companies out there usually stick with like 9 things before you have to switch to another card. Here, Nikon just keeps going and going. Moving on to release mode, this is very important. Right now it's set to single frame, meaning if I press the shutter button and hold my finger down forever, it will only take one picture. But if we want to do continuous low, which would take a couple of frames when you hold your finger down continuously, you would go to continuous low. You've got continuous high, which is faster. And then continuous high plus allows you to get to 20 frames per second, but only in electronic shutter mode. So no mechanical shutter, but electronic shutter mode. Now, all of these modes, H+, H, HL, and single, can be done in RAW. Now, if you want to extend that and shoot C30, which is 30 frames a second, 60 frames a second, 120 frames a second, you are only able to shoot JPEG large at that point. So if you're just a JPEG shooter and you want to shoot at 30, 60, or 120 frames a second, well, then you can do that, but you're also going to only be doing it with the electronic shutter, which is fine. It's pretty good. It's not a problem not to use the mechanical shutter, but you will only get JPEG as an option. Then you have self-timer mode as well, which will be press the shutter button down, and then it's going to beep, 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 and then it's going to take a picture. So I generally live in the H+ or the H mode, depending on what I'm shooting. If I'm doing something that doesn't require a lot of frames per second, maybe I'll be in continuous low, but you have to figure out which mode is right for you. So I'll go into continuous H for now. Focus modes. We've got AFS, AFC, so continuous autofocus, or manual focus. Manual focus is obviously something where you control the focus by turning your lens and manually do it. AFC for continuous means continuous autofocus. Let me select this because I will show you what happens. I'm in continuous autofocus like almost in the entire time here. I'm always going to be in it. I'm holding my finger halfway down and it's going to continue to focus no matter what I point it at. See, it focused on the screen, now it's focusing on the background and my finger is pressed all the way down. Look at Steven. Steven's over here, continuously focused. My finger is halfway down, it's continuously focusing. But if I go into the next mode, which is single point, and I go ahead and I focus at a distance, you see how it lights up green? That means it's in focus. But if I move it and I try to point at this screen, it's not going to focus. See? Only the exposure is changing because we're in auto ISO, but if I take my finger off the button and repress it, it refocuses. But that's an old school way of shooting. We don't really shoot that way anymore because continuous focus is so good, especially when we activate what's called IAF and face detect. It's so good these days that generally speaking, I'm in AFC 100% of the time. Well, 99.99% of the time to be more exact. Next up, we've got AF area modes, which is also very important. We've got single point AF, dynamic area AF. You've got dynamic small, medium, and large, which gives you a small, medium, and larger box. You've got wide area AF. You've got 3D tracking and auto area AF. Auto area AF is going to automatically choose the best mode for you. 3D tracking is very similar to that. Nikon gets a little confusing because there's so many different modes to choose from. Very rarely will I be in single point unless I'm shooting an object that is just right there and I don't have to worry about it, because I like going into the old school ways are dynamic area. That's what we would shoot with DSLRs way back in the day. I like to say, let's go into the whole area AF, and we're gonna have Steven look at us right now. Steven, look at us. See that? Yeah, it's finding the box right around his eye. See that, how it's tracking his eye? That is incredible. That is one of the greatest inventions in all of the history of cameras, and it's tracking Steven's eye, and it's staying on his eye, it's not going to his hand. That is why we stay in continuous focus all the time, because our focusing systems are so good that that's what it does. It finds the eye. So let's go back in here. That's the one where it would automatically select it all the time. I like to play around with the different small, medium, and large modes here with the wide area. So for now, we could do auto area AF is a very good one when you're just starting out. You know what? It's gonna be easier for me to show you this in action. So let me get out of this area. Right, hit the shutter button. Let me hit the I button so I can change it right here. We've got area subject detection. Let's go and make it to AF area mode small. You can see that the box changed. So now this is a smaller box and I'm moving it around. If I want to change the box again, I can go in here and I could be like, okay, let's go to small area. See that? Now this isn't as good for tracking. This is the old school way of doing it. It's not going to lock onto your subject just like it did with Steven's eye. For that, we need to be in any of these ones right here, the wide, the large, or these. You could see changes the size of the box to like, oh, if I'm doing tennis and it's just above the net, you could do something like this. So if you don't want to go into the menu system, there is a quicker way to do this. There's this function button too on the front of the camera. I'm pressing the button, you can see that the yellow highlights around AFC as well as that box mode. As I turn my front finger, you can see it's going through all the different mode options that we have. It just did 3D, that's 3D, and then we have all of these other ones. So you can quickly dial through which one you want to use, all the way back to the all-encompassing. So you can see that you have all of those different options to go through, and you can change it without having to come into the menu system, which is always nice. Now, subject detection options, you have auto, which is going to decide between people, animals, and everything else. But you could be like, oh, I'm only photographing people, or I'm only doing animals, vehicles, airplanes, or you could turn subject detection off altogether. I'm a big proponent of subject detection. The auto is a good place to be, because what you don't want to do is have it set to animals and you're photographing your animals, and then all of a sudden you're photographing your other animals, which are your kids, and it's not finding the focus on their face as well because it's looking for a smaller eye. Then you would want to make sure that you were on people for that. But generally speaking, auto is a great place to be. Now, I should also take a second to explain what subject detection actually is. That's telling the camera what subject it should be looking for. So if you're photographing people or the animals, you'll still get that little box to show up on the eye for the animal, as long as you have your AF area modes to this one, which is the all-encompassing, or the 3D, or the other ones that aren't the dynamic area. Dynamic area won't track Steven's face at all, or single point, because it just doesn't. You need to be in the wide areas or the 3D or the auto in order to do that. So subject detection just means if I'm photographing animals or I have it set to auto, it's going to auto detect which one to select from. What this also means is that the camera is helping you focus where it needs to be. It's detecting those subjects, which makes it so much easier for you to focus on composition and shooting, because the camera's taking care of the autofocus, whereas with the others, you have to move the focus box, the focusing point, to get to the subject, and by that point, you might have already missed what you were trying to photograph. Next up, we've got manual focus. Subject detection area is currently off. Now, if you're using some of the vintage lenses, which a lot of Nikon shooters have older lenses that they might adapt to put onto this camera, this would be something that you would turn on. I generally don't shoot manual focus lenses or really shoot manual, so I leave that off. Vibration reduction is very important. Most lenses that Nikon makes have some sort of vibration reduction built into them, but you also have vibration reduction in the body. The image sensor is stabilized, so it helps counteract and work with the lens to give you the best stability possible. Normal or sport, it depends on what you're shooting. Sport is very good to get rid of that herky-jerky that you might see. With certain lenses, you might see the image stabilization activate. So it goes from still to click, you'll hear a click and you'll see it lock in, and that might be a little awkward to you. One way we get rid of that is we go to sport, or you could turn it off altogether if you're just on a tripod and you end up not needing the stabilization. Next up, we have link VR to focus point. This is something new in here. I would just leave it on. In essence, it's using that focus point that you choose to really put most of the vibration reduction to kind of focus there, but the whole image is still stabilizing, so that's something I just leave on. Auto bracketing is off. Bracketing is if you want to shoot one that's properly exposed, one underexposed, one auto overexposed. So I leave that off unless you need to do bracketing. Multiple exposures is something that a lot of people like to play with, where you can take a picture and then instead of having a new picture the next time you take it, it will take a picture on top of your other picture, then allowing you to see like the ghost of someone running around the baseball field because you have two different pictures that you took. It's fun to play with. It's something we used to do back in the film day. We've got HDR overlay is off. We're not shooting in HDR. We've got interval timer shooting is very powerful to have in here. Used to have to buy a whole $200 remote to make this happen, but this is if you wanted to shoot some time lapse. You can go in here and control it and say, well, start on this date, wow, and shoot right now that's like 1 minute. No, that's 1 hour, I think. Or is that a minute? No, it's an hour. No, that's a minute, and the other one's the second. So you could say every second take a picture, and then you could do exposure smoothing. So if you're shooting as the sun is going down, it's going to compensate the exposure so it's not just locked into the wrong exposure. It's going to smooth it across the image as you're taking multiple images, or smooth it across multiple images, which is awesome. Electronic shutter option you could have on or off, meaning if you want to shoot in complete silence and do a time lapse, well, you could leave this on and no one would know that you're taking pictures because it's using the silent mode. So intervalometer is a super powerful thing to have. So I hope you're enjoying this user guide for the Nikon Z6 III. As you can tell, this is a close to 2-hour long video, and a lot of people ask, how can they support content like this that we put out for free? Well, there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that with us. You can watch our videos, subscribe to our videos, but you can also purchase our Lightroom presets at FroKnowsPhoto.com/FroPack4. Over there, you can see them, see how they work, and you can pick up a Grand Slam bundle or any of the 4 FroPacks that you would like. That is the best way you can show your support for the free content that we created that is definitely going to save you a ton of time learning and setting up your camera. So now let's jump back into the video. Next is time-lapse video. So this is going to take basically a ton of photos and then bake it into a finished video file that's going to then speed up, whereas the other one for intervalometer timer shooting is going to give you each individual still. Focus shift shooting is pretty good. If you're someone who likes to do macro and you want to get the entire bug in focus, you can set it so that it will take, man, it could take 100 pictures. It could probably do more than that. Look at that, 900, let's see. Oh no, 300, and I would assume, 300's the max. So you could do 300 photos, which is insane. of a bug, like you wanted to do macro, and it would take a picture, move the focus, take a picture, move the focus, and it's going to keep moving it, and then you would have to put it together with software to turn it into a fully in focus image. And then finally, you've got pixel shift shooting. This is if you want a much higher resolution image. It says you could do 16 of these images, so the camera is going to move the image sensor, say on a tripod, and take multiple images and then put them all together to give you a much larger file. Keep in mind, if you're photographing something that's moving, it's not going to work out as well. So that's something, if you say you were shooting a work of art and it's not moving and you lit it and you want to get the highest quality file possible, you could have it do multiple shots with that with pixel shift to give you a much higher res image file. And that, my friends, is a long menu for photo shooting menu, but we have reached the end of photo shooting menu. Now we're jumping into the video recording menu. If you're not looking to shoot video at this point or set up this, you can go into the table of contents down below and skip on to the next section if you would like. Now, we're not going to go through every single thing here because you're going to see there's a lot of repeats from the photo menu setting, but there are a handful that we need to talk about. For example, we don't need storage folder file naming. We've already done this, but destination, being that you can't shoot redundant video, so like we did with photos, we had photos going to both cards, the same photo. This time you can't do that, but it's showing me that I will get 2 hours and no minutes and 23 seconds or 59 minutes and 42 seconds with the SD card slot. You can see which one you want to send it to. Generally speaking, the CF Express card slot is going to be the better card slot, faster cards, faster transfer rates to the computer. Once you put the card in the computer, that's going to be better. And to add on to that, in certain video modes in the higher qualities, you might be forced to just using a CF Express card. And if you only had the SD, you might not be able to unlock all of the power of Grayskull. And by Grayskull, I mean the video camera features from your Z6 III. Video file type. So right here, you can see all of the different options that you have. You've got your NRAW 12-bit SDR, your ProRes RAW HQ 12-bit, ProRes 422 HQ. For those that are just getting into video, it might be best to do auto video while you're starting, but for those who want to take more control of your camera, you have all of these other options that you can personally dive into. Now, generally speaking, I'm probably going to be in ProRes 422 HQ 10-bit, or I would be in H.265 10-bit movie. So as you'll notice, the highest quality is all the way at the top, and as you go down to the bottom, you have your lower quality options. Now, one other thing, where you see it say SDR, this is where you could go in and hit the right D-pad button, and you can then do N-Log, HLG, or SDR. There's more that you can unlock when you see that, so just understand that that is there. Next up, we've got frame size and frame rate. Now, if you're not seeing a frame rate that you think you should be seeing, well, you might want to go back and check your video file type, because depending on what you select here will give you the options that you can use under the frame size and frame rate. So you could see we can have 4K 120. As you can see up here, this is your 5.4K at 60 frames per second. Just remember, that's using a lot more data. It's going to burn a lot more battery and a lot more in the card situation. But if you're looking for that cinematic look, 24p is the cinematic movie look. Video game look and TV look is more of 60p, and then slow motion, you've got 120p as well. But you can dial down. You don't have to do just 4K. You could do 1080. You have a lot of different options to go through, and just select the one that works best for you. But like with photos, you can never dumb up, but you can always dumb down. So higher quality is generally better, but that doesn't mean you should always shoot at 60p or 120p. It just means higher quality with the star is a better place to be. But we personally go ahead and shoot right here in 24p. This is 4K 24p. That's where we personally shoot. Next, you've got video quality. If you're shooting in NRAW, you have two options. You've got high quality and normal. Same thing applies here. You cannot dumb up, but you can always dumb down. Then we've got image area. We already talked about this. ISO sensitivity, white balance, set picture control. It's important for me to mention once again, if you're shooting video here, you are baking in the white balance. You are locking it in. So if you get it wrong here, it's going to be much harder to correct with the video file. Picture control. if you get it wrong here, it's going to be almost impossible, if not impossible, to correct. If you shoot it in monochrome, but you want color, you're screwed. You saved it all in monochrome, it's all thrown out. The only exception to that rule might be if you are shooting raw video. We don't personally shoot raw video here. It's way too much to work with, but you do have the option. So keep in mind, get your picture style correct. If you don't want it to be super vivid and over the top and you want it to be pulled back a little bit, go ahead and tweak those settings. Manage picture control, HLG, nope, active D-lighting, same thing. We've already gone over all of these, so we can skip right past them because we talked about what they're doing. Video flicker reduction, again, if you're in an area where there's a lot of flickering, this might come in handy. You have high frequency flicker reduction, same as before. Metering modes. Next up, we have focus mode with AFF. Now, AFF is a great place to be because that's going to allow you to use the eye detection and the face detection, the subject tracking. That's incredible. As you saw when it found Steven's eye earlier, that's what you're going to want on, not just continuous or single AF. The only time you would probably use single AF is if you're locking something off that isn't moving and you don't want the focus to shift. That's where you would go into single AF, but most of the time you're going to be in AFF or manual focus if you are you're using manual lenses. All of this stuff is the same. Next up, we have audio input selection. Most of the time, we're going to be using the external mic, or mic, M-I-C, right here. But you have the option for line. So if you're recording from a soundboard, if it's at a church or a synagogue or a religious institution or at a concert, you can go line in right from a board into the camera and get that audio. So generally speaking, you're going to have the microphone selected. You've got audio input sensitivity is currently set to auto. If you know nothing about controlling audio, this is going to do a fairly good job. You do have the option of turning the microphone off completely, which means you'll get no audio, or you could do manual, and it's like, I talk really loud, so I like to lower it down here, and see, it's not peaking into the red, where this, it's going to peak into the red. So that's if you're going to take manual control over things. Generally speaking, auto is going to do a fairly good job. Next up, we've got the attenuator. This is currently off, but if you're not able to monitor the audio, a good way to make sure that it's not going to peak or go off the charts and off the range is you would turn the attenuator on. It's a good thing to have on if you're not around to take control. Frequency response, you've got vocal range and wide. We generally leave it on wide so you can get the widest range there. You've got wind noise reduction. Only if you're in a super windy area does this even help. So that's something that we generally keep off, or we make sure that we have some kind of windsock or dead cat on our microphone. Mic jack power, we leave on. Headphone volume is, of course, up to you. When you plug the headphone in, how loud do you want to hear the audio coming out? Time code is if you are someone who's shooting multiple cameras and you want them to sync up, you would then set them with time code. External recording control, HDMI, meaning if I was to use this recorder here and I want to hit record on the screen, it would then control the camera and tell it to hit record, but we leave that off. And finally, we've got high res zoom is currently off. This is for those times where you want to punch in a little closer, but you don't have enough lens to do it. You could do it here. It's just a form of digital zoom. So generally speaking, it's best practice to keep it off unless you really need it. And then you could go ahead and turn it on. That right there takes us through the menu recording section. The next thing we're going to jump into is custom settings menu. We can reset custom settings, which we don't want to do because we haven't set any, but if you do set them, you don't want to reset them. You can see you've got all the way down the list, A, B, C, D, E, F, oh, and they added the G for video. We have to go through each one of these. When you hit arrow over, you can see that there are a lot of different functions that we have to talk about and go through before we get to B. But we're not going to hit and harp on everything here. We're going to start right here with AFC priority selection. I leave this set to release. If you wanted to make sure that it won't shoot unless it's absolutely in focus, you would then put it onto focus, but you might end up missing some shots. Release means it's going to take a picture even if it's out of focus. I tend to just leave it here. I haven't noticed it being a problem because the autofocus has gotten so much better, and I found in the past that sometimes it's like, it's not in focus, but it is in focus, so I leave that the way it is. Priority selection for AFS, I leave alone. Let's see, AF tracking with lock on. Now this is something we should read about. Let's see, choose how long the camera waits before adjusting focus when an object comes between camera and subject. Options range from 1, quick, to 5, delayed. So the higher the number, the more it's going to delay the subject to being a distraction. So if you're photographing someone running down the field for soccer and someone else runs in front, if we wanted it to switch to that new person, we would put it on quick. 3 is right in the middle where it starts, and then of course 5 is going to delay that. In some situations that's good, but in other situations you're going to want it to jump to the new subject, so it's up to you to decide and play with that on where you want to go. That might be better in a video setting for when you want to track subjects, but I leave it right there. Focus points used. You have a ton of focusing points inside of this camera. I leave it on all points just because I want to be able to select between them, but 99% of the time at this point, the camera is automatically using all of the points to find the best one that's right for you. I don't need alternating points personally. We're not manually shifting like we used to, where this used to be more important. Next, we have store points by orientation. I have this off. What this means is it will change the focusing point. If you go vertical, the point will then reset back, say, to the right side of the frame if you had it on the right side of the frame. I like to leave the focusing point exactly where it is, and then if I need to physically move it, which 99% of the time today with lock-on tracking, I don't have to move it. I leave this off just so the focusing points stay where they are, whether I'm vertical or horizontal. Next up is AF activation. Currently it's on. That means you will either use the shutter pressed halfway down to focus, or you could do the AF on button on the back to do the focus, to activate it. Then you have AF on only, meaning only the back button will be focusing. You hear people talk about back button focus all the time if you're searching the internet on which mode, or searching YouTube, which focus mode you should use. I am a front button focus person through and through. I feel that it's the best choice, especially with today's modern cameras. Back in the olden days, 15, 20 years ago, back button focus made more sense because it was just easier in sports to lock onto a subject, remove your finger, and even with distractions coming across, still not have an issue that it won't focus on them. It will stay locked where you wanted it. But with the power of today's cameras, I don't want to do two things. I don't want to hold my finger on the AF on button and then have to press the shutter fully to take a picture. That to me is telling my brain I need to do two things. I need to focus on this and I need to focus on this. Whereas I can just press the shutter button halfway down, and when I'm ready to take the picture, I take the picture. I hold it down. I do what I need to do. That's one thing, but it's doing two things. It's much easier to do it with one finger than to have to worry about two fingers to do multiple things, at least in my opinion, which makes it a fact. A flat fact.
Is a term demanding an equal answer with a term.
Next up, we've got focus point persistence is set to auto. I wish they had a question mark here because even when we look this up in the manual, it still makes no sense. It has something to do with leaving the focusing point where it is in auto, or if you turn it off, it's going to leave it where it is for where you manually did it. It's confusing. We leave it on auto. Limit area AF modes. This is actually pretty interesting. Do you remember when I hit the function 2 button and I was rotating through all of the different focusing points, and I'm like, I don't use dynamic area ever, so I could turn those off and they no longer will show up when I'm doing. Say I don't want to have single point or something. I don't want pinpoint AF. I would turn that off, and then I would go ahead and hit the menu done down here, and those will no longer show up in the modes, so I can't accidentally hit it, or they just don't show up so I can more quickly switch from what I want to switch to. Focus point wraparound is something that I personally turn on. What that means is I actually have to change. Let me go to I, and then I need to change to this. I'm hitting left and it's coming back on the right. That means that it's just going to constantly go in a circle. Where if I had the other mode on, focus mode, where we turned focus wrap off, it would just stop all the way at the right. It's not focusing wrapping all the way around. I actually like to have it on because if I'm in control, I sometimes want to go all the way to the left without having to go to the left. We got focus point display. We've got manual focus mode. It will show us dynamic area also on. In focus display, I'm going to read this to you because this is one that I would actually think should be on by default. If the camera is able to focus using AFC, the focus point will be displayed in green. Well, I want that. Green is good. Green is good. I mean, green is good. Red is bad in this situation, so I want that on. 3D tracking focusing point. So if you're in 3D tracking, I want the focusing point to be red. It's more easy to see than white, so I put that on red. Let me cut in here real quick and let you know that this video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you're looking to build your very own online portfolio, use what I've been using for my personal website at jaredpolin.com for 15 years at this point, because it's simple, easy, affordable, and I don't need to know coding, and I'm never gonna know coding. So to get your 14-day free trial, head on over to squarespace.com/FroKnowsPhoto. If you decide that it's for you, use the code FroKnowsPhoto at checkout to get 10% off your first order. Coming back out here, built-in AF beam illuminator, AF assist beam. That was the light I showed you in the front. I don't like having that on. That is a distraction to me, so I turn it off. Focus peaking is something that we leave off. This is for those who are going to shoot in manual. You're going to be able to see around the edges what's sharper. Most people aren't shooting that, and the ones that need to do it, this is where focus peaking is if you're doing manual. Focus point selection speed, that's normal, high, or low. I think normal is pretty good. High means that it's going to rotate really fast and you might miss one of the points that you actually want to get to. Manual focus ring in AF mode, we want that off. Let me show you guys. You're going to be really frustrated when you get your camera. I am turning the manual focus ring of this lens, and you see how that rose showed up and the infinity showed up? Even though I'm in continuous autofocus, it overrides and automatically goes on with manual focus. I don't ever want manual focus to override my autofocus in any situation. So I am going to go ahead and go back into the menu and turn this one to off. Now, when I turn it, Steven and I have so much trouble finding this all the time in the Nikons. This should be on by default. This shouldn't be something that should be off by default. You shouldn't have to dig into a menu system to figure it out, but I figured it out for you. Right here, it's A14 to turn that off. If you are finding yourself accidentally going into manual, this is where it is. It's under A14, turn it off. The reason it's annoying is the fact that the ring is literally the entire barrel of the lens for a lot of Nikon lenses. So you accidentally hit it just by putting your hand here. So finally we found it. Make sure that is off. Now we move into B, metering and exposure. A lot of what is already set here is kind of legacy settings from DSLRs from way back in the day. Nikon hasn't changed a lot. They've updated their menu system, but a lot of these things are more fine-tuned for old school way of shooting, and that's why we're gonna jump around here and not really talk about everything. But ISO sensitivity step values, I always leave on a third. I don't like one-stop increments because I like to go in between. EV steps for exposure control, I do that as a third as well. Easy exposure compensation, I have exposure compensation off. I leave that off. I don't use that at all. Never have, even in the DSLR days. Matrix metering face detection is another thing that I leave off. But what that would do is once it found the face, the box, it would meter for the face using the whole face. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but generally speaking, when we get into the live view mode, you will see that your exposure is controlled by you, and you can see the exposure right in front of your face in real time. That's why a lot of the old modes are kind of meaningless at this point. Center weighted area we have set to standard. There's other options, average and small. It doesn't matter. I mean, if you're someone who wants it to be, who wants to just be average and standard and small? Where's large and extra large? A lot of us want to be large and extra large, but we all can't be there. Fine-tune optimal exposure is another thing that I don't even go. Exposure compensation icon is not displayed. So leave that off. Keep exposure when f-stop changes. This is off as well. And that's it for B. Like I said, most of this stuff is just set by default to places that are fine. Now we move into C. We've got shutter release button, AE lock off. Self-timer is something that you might want to go into. This is where you can change between 2, 5, 10, 20 seconds. Number of shots, meaning it can take up to 9 shots in a row. So if we say, do a 2-second delay, and we tell it to do 9 shots, it will do 9 shots, at a ½ second interval. So after the first 2 seconds, it's gonna take the picture first, and then in a ½ second, take another ½ second, take another ½ second, take another. What's it gonna do in a ½ second, Steven?
Take another.
It's gonna take another, up to 9 shots. So that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool setting. That's where you find that. There's a lot of different options. Playback is currently set to 10 minutes. We maxed these out just so that it doesn't turn off and mess up our recording here. But you could turn playback menu to be like 4 seconds or 2 seconds. Menus, picture review. This is when the picture pops up on the back of the screen. How long do you want it to stay live? I mean, honestly, I turn it off manually all the time just by hitting the shutter button halfway, and that gets rid of the picture and I'm back to shooting. But if you just left it, it could be set to 4 seconds and it would turn off. Standby timer, we have set for infinity right now. CL mode shooting speed. CL stands for continuous low. I don't know why they don't have a question mark here to explain that to you, but that's why I'm here to explain it to you. Thumbs up right now. Hit that thumbs up button. I'm gonna wait. You hit the button? I'm still waiting. You better hit the button. Thank you for hitting the button. Now hit subscribe. Subscribe. Right now, continuous low is set to 5. You could have continuous low be 7 all the way down to 1. So you can set it, just determine what you want it to be. Maximum shots per burst, you're rarely ever gonna go past, infinite. You could do it infinite. JPEGs are gonna keep shooting. You're never gonna get a 200 burst of RAW. So there's that. Pre-capture option. Okay, this is one of the greatest settings ever in Canons and Sonys, not so much in Nikons unless you're a JPEG shooter. Pre-burst means that you can set the camera when you press your shutter halfway down, it's going to buffer images, and then when you press the shutter fully without first releasing your finger from the button, those buffered images will be saved, and then it will continue to shoot as long as you're shooting. I did this at the Phillies game with this camera where you can, I did pre-capture for just JPEG where I was waiting for the batter to swing. I would hold the button halfway down, then the batter would swing, and I would press the button fully, and I would get all of those the image before. You can do it at 1/3 of a second, a ½ a second, or all the way up to a full second of pre-burst. Post-release burst is really not something that I'll ever use. I'm not even sure why it's here. Do they even tell you what it does? The pre-release burst includes frame buffered over time, select the length of time, blah, 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 and it doesn't even tell you. Oh, there it is, post-burst. Choose the length of time burst recorded while the shutter release button is pressed all the way down. So it will just keep shooting after the fact. I don't like that, so I've never actually used that. But keep in mind, if you do this and you shoot RAW, you can't do it. It's gonna go right to JPEG, and that's what you're getting with pre-release. Sync release mode options, we skip this. Exposure delay mode, leave it on off. Shutter types are important to talk about. You've got auto, where the camera's gonna decide between mechanical shutter, electronic front curtain shutter, as well as electronic shutter. It tells us this right here. It says the camera automatically changes between, hey, I just read that without actually reading it. I'm so smart sometimes. Thumbs up. Don't hit it again because it might take it away. So leave it there. Auto is generally a good place to go here, but mechanical shutter cannot shoot at 20 frames per second. So like I said earlier, if you go to 20 frames per second, it's going to go into electronic shutter mode. So if you leave it on auto, it's going to generally use the proper one. So it does a very good job. Or if you just want to shoot silent and electronic all the time, you can go in there and shoot with the electronic shutter mode and be set right there. Now let me explain electronic shutter real quick. Electronic shutter means that no physical curtain shutter is now coming down. That allows you to get to 20 frames per second. This has what's called a partially stacked sensor in it. It has a very fast readout speed from when you press the shutter to the time you get the picture that the image is actually captured. But with an electronic shutter, there is a potential for rolling shutter where a ball might warp or bow depending on how close to the subject, the angle, or how fast the ball is moving. It does a very good job for just about everyday things, and it takes a slight image quality hit. Now with mechanical shutter, you can't get to 20 frames per second, and it's theoretically the best quality that you can get with an image. If you were to take mechanical versus electronic, they might look slightly different because the electronic shutter is not giving you the same exact quality. Is it that far off? The answer is no. Most people will never know the difference, but you've got your mechanical shutter, which is going to allow you to not shoot up to 20 frames per second. It's going to be less, and your electronic shutter, which can shoot more. But you will not get any rolling shutter with the mechanical shutter at all. Now, extended shutter speeds is off. If you're someone who is going to shoot long exposures and you want something longer than 30 seconds, you would then go ahead and turn this on, because as you can see right here, it can extend it past 30 seconds, from 30 seconds to 900 seconds, which is nice to have. It doesn't make any sense why this is off. I guess they don't want people going below a certain time without knowing what they're actually doing, but that is what you do. You can turn that on. Limit selectable image areas. So if I never want to shoot in DX and I never want to shoot 1:1 and I never want to shoot in 16:9, I can lock it in so that those options will never ever show up for me. Next up, we've got file number sequence. I leave this on. The reason I leave it on is every time I change cards, I don't want it to reset to 0 again. Or if you change folders, you could then change, if you turn file number sequence off, it's going to start each new folder at 0. So when your file number sequence is on, you take 100 pictures, take the card out, load it onto the computer, put the card back in the camera. You don't want it to start back at 0, it would start at 101 for the next photo. Next up, we've got D10 view mode, photo live view. We have this show effects of settings. Remember how I told you earlier that the exposure is right in front of your face? This is what I'm talking about. Let me take off the lens cap. Let me get out of auto ISO, which again, we press ISO, turn the front dial. You see how it's now dark? It's like there's not enough light. This is live. This is showing us exactly what the exposure is going to be. But if I show it over here, it's like, okay, that might be the right exposure. But I want to show you over here. It's dark. You can actually see the light, the screen in the background. I'm going to raise my ISO. Keep raising it. Do you see? We're at 4,000. Now I'm going to turn my shutter speed down. And now we're getting that exposure right. Over on the right-hand side, we have our exposure meter. Theoretically, that is the proper exposure. I could take this picture and this would be the exposure that I would see. So if you see something that looks like this, you're like, wait a second, that's not looking right. Well, you know not to take that picture and you just correct for it with your shutter speed in this case, and it makes it correct. So this is showing you live in your eyeball through the viewfinder, your exposure. That's why we leave this setting on. That's why that is very important. So I keep the live view setting on like that under D10. Continuing on, we've got starlight view. If you're an astrophotographer, you might want to turn this on. It's going to make the screen brighter for potentially making it easier to see the star that you want to photograph. So I go ahead and leave that off. Warm display colors off. It's like iPhone being warm. I don't want that. I want accurate colors, and warm generally isn't accurate. D13 is LCD illumination. Right here, that's the top screen. Right now it's off. You can have it so that it will illuminate. You can turn that on. I never use that screen, so I leave that off. Next up, we have view all in continuous mode. It's still not a thing that I even understand what it is. I leave it where it is. Release time and indicator, I don't go in here and change this at all. These are things that are just such deep pulls that maybe they're super legacy things that old Nikon shooters used that you don't even need to use at all. Image frame, you leave that on. Grid type, this is if you want to shoot like, to help you see what 16:9, 1:1, 5:4, or 4:4 would be, you can use this to help for your rule of thirds. I generally leave that off. You've got virtual horizon, 2 different options that you could use. Custom monitor shooting display is important to understand. So right here, we have different options. This is when we would hit the display button and this would all change on the back. It's showing you what is showing up in your monitor display. So that's the back LCD screen. We could have this display 3, display 4, display 5, and let's say we'll go to display 4 and we want to change some stuff. Like, okay, we want details to show up. There they are. We don't want whatever this touch is. Oh, it said it right there, touch controls. We don't want touch controls. Oh, we want the grid on. We could have that. Center indicator can always be on, and then center weight area can be on, and then you could just save this by hitting done. And so you can select and customize your display for your taste. Now, the same thing can happen for your viewfinder. This is your electronic viewfinder. You can come in here and make custom changes like, oh, I want details to be there, and I want this to be there, and I want this to be there. And then you can see how distracting it gets. So I don't want that, so I'm not gonna hit menu done. I'm just gonna go ahead and hit the arrow to the left, and that takes us back to our menu without doing any saves. Any saves, that's like playing Zelda. You can't save Zelda. Well, technically you do start Zelda where you left off, but not when you die. But that's original Zelda. Anyway, high frames per second viewfinder display. This is if you want the highest quality, quickest refresh rate of your electronic viewfinder. Say you're shooting some fast-moving subjects and you want to make sure that you can see them and there's no lag. Not that there's ever any lag. I never see lag with this anyway, but I leave this off because if you turn it on, you will take a slight hit with image quality. Let me cut in here real quick and say, are you tired of your friends and family just giving you thumbs up and fire emojis on all of your photos when you post them, but you want actual, real feedback from a photographer, someone who knows what they're talking about? Yeah, I know what I'm talking about. Well, I have two different mentorship options that I offer over at FroKnowsPhoto.com/mentorship. One is a 15-minute recorded rapid-fire critique of your best 50 images, and the other is a live one-on-one 45-minute Zoom call with me where we look at 100 of your images and give you all the feedback that you need. Even if you just want to talk, we can have a conversation. So head on over to FroKnowsPhoto.com/mentorship to check out free previews of both of those so you can get an understanding of what you can expect. We can basically skip all of E because that's all for Flash. We're not talking about Flash or using Flash today, but that brings us to F, Customize iMenu. Earlier you saw me hit the iMenu to go ahead and change a couple of things, but if we want to change this and we say like, we don't want picture control here, but we want ISO sensitivity, we could put ISO there. Let's say we don't want tone mode, we can go to say, well, let's see, view memory card info could go right here. These are things that you can quickly get to without having to dive in to the menu. So if you want to quickly get to something, they give you the option right here, and you can make those saves, and now they are locked in. Custom controls for shooting. This is where we start to get major power for our camera. It will highlight the button, and it will say that if I use function button 1, that's white balance. Remember earlier when I pressed function button 2 and that allowed me to change between the focusing modes? Let's say you didn't want that. You could be like, no, I want it to be multiple exposure, or I want it to change metering or different active delighting. You have a lot of control to put different settings here. And this is something that's personal to you. I don't change a lot of these right here, but let's say I didn't want the record button to do something. Live view info display is off. So I could change this and be like, you know what? When I hit this, I want something else to happen. I don't know what else. I could say my menu, I want that to pop up. So you have the power to change what each thing does. It's self-explanatory because it tells you what it is, or you can scroll over to the right and you have even more options to play with. So this is powerful. I don't really change very much because their settings are pretty good right off the bat. You also have custom controls for playback. So if you're going to play back your images when you hit the playback button, you can see you could jump through by turning the command dial. That will let you go through the different settings and change the photos. You can zoom in by hitting the OK button to take you right to the center. I do like that option. That's a good one. But they're already preset. You can have it do 1:1. You could do it high magnification where it could jump in, but 1:1 is generally pretty good. So let's go back there, back to controls. Touch function. This is something that is legacy as well, that if your eye was up to the viewfinder, you could still have the screen be active. There's really nothing that we need to activate on the screen at this point that we can't already do inside the camera, so we keep that off. Or this is also good for cameras that don't have joysticks, but your camera does have a joystick with knipples on it, so you're good. Control lock. Let's say we don't want to change the shutter speed at all. You can lock it in. Another thing I don't ever change. Reverse dial rotation. That means if you didn't want the back to be shutter speed and you wanted it to be the front, I don't know why you would do that. You could go ahead and change that. I leave it set the exact way that it's set. Next up, we've got release button to use dial. Remember how I pressed the F2 button and I changed the focus modes? Or another one is you could hit ISO, but I had to hold ISO down and turn the dial. If you turn this on, you can hit ISO once, turn the dial, and then in order to get back to shooting, you would hit the button again. Too much, too complicated, no need to do that. Reverse indicators, nope. Reverse ring focus, we leave that off. Focus ring rotation range, I don't change any of that. Control ring response, I don't use the control ring personally, but you could change it from high to low. Switch focus control ring rolls, I'd leave that off. Power zoom, that's if you're using a PZ lens, which is what PZ stands for, power zoom. You can change different buttons that you could change the speed, that's where you would get control here. Full frame playback flicks, this is like if you flick the screen like you're looking at an iPhone. I don't bother with that. And finally, we've got Prefer Sub-Selector Center. I don't even know what this is, and it doesn't even give us a question mark, which means that Nikon doesn't know what it is either. Now we're gonna jump to G, which is the last one. It's the video menus. You can see you can customize the button for video, the I button. This is different than when for stills, so the same things apply. You can go in here and change to whatever you want it to be. Maybe I want the white balance right here, and now the white balance is right there. Like I said, the same as when it came to photos. Now, just to reiterate, that's when you switch into the video mode with the switch from still mode. So that's when that I menu will change. You can still shoot video from the photo mode, but this would then change everything so that the previews and all of the buttons would change over to whatever is set, like custom controls. You would set custom controls for video here, and that is all determined by switching that switch. Same thing, you can go in here and change any of these buttons that highlight to do a video function that might be the best for you. You just have to decide what works for you, because not everything is the same for everybody with those settings. Next up, we have control lock. You've got shutter speed lock, aperture lock, and focus point lock. You might want to use shutter speed lock if you never want the shutter speed to change and the camera's going to do the rest. That might be the only time you do that. But also, if you don't change the shutter speed yourself, you then don't run into that issue. Limit AF area mode selection. So again, if I don't want any of these other modes to show up under video and I only want to quickly switch between single point and AF area AF, I would just have those two selected and I wouldn't have to skip through the others, so you are saving time. AF speed, same thing, slower or faster. Do you want it to be faster or do you want it to be slower? So one's more cinematic than the other, and it all depends on the effect that you're going for. If it's for sports or action, you might just want it to leave it on fast, and if you want it to be more cinematic, you might want to slow it down just a little bit. AF tracking sensitivity, same as before. How long do we want it to stay on the subject? 7, low, or high, if you wanted to jump around like crisscross, because I'll make you. But you can decide where you want that to be. High-res zoom speed. Now this is for, we talked about this earlier, how fast do you want to zoom in? Obviously you can do faster, you can do slower, but this is just like with the stills, you can punch in kind of like a digital zoom. Next up, we've got power zoom PZ button options, very similar to what we had with the with stills, but you could do pre and post recording, you could do +3, you could change this to go faster or slower. Obviously, this is all to taste. You have to find out which settings work best for you. I don't dive in here because I don't use any of the PZ lenses myself. I also don't use a lot of Nikon to need this. And even if I was using a PZ lens on a Canon, still wouldn't change very much either. Next up, we have fine ISO control. This is off, but if you want to go into like 1/6 of a stop, you could do that instead of 1/3 of a stop. So it gives you a little bit more control. You've got extended shutter speeds. This is something that we like to turn on in case you ever need to get those other speeds. View assist is currently off, but if you are shooting N-Log, which is giving you a flat looking video, you could do view assist, and then that would basically be a LUT in there that's going to give you what a close look at what the final video would look like when you edit it. So that's nice to have on if you do shoot that way. Next up, we've got zebra patterns, which is only going to affect when you're in video mode, but that's to show you, if I was to point something at a bright light and there was no detail there, it would show up as a zebra pattern to show you that you have no detail there at all. Limit zebra pattern tone range. You can go in here and say, do you want just the midtones or highlights? Grid type, brightness information display, is set to histogram right now. You have the other option, which is waveform monitor, and then you have waveform monitor large. This is getting super technical for those getting into video, so I don't mess with any of this. But most of these are exposure tools for those of you who are going to get more extreme and get into the log footage. Those who need to know will know. Those who don't, like me, we don't use it. Custom monitor shooting display, same as it was for stills. You can change the custom monitor and custom viewfinder data that shows up just from here. And finally, the red record frame indicator is on, which means when you're recording video around your LCD screen and inside your viewfinder, you will see the red box around the outside of the frame so you know you're shooting. I mean, this is something that's nice to have on, and that takes us to the end of the pencil menu, as I call it, the custom setting menu. That is a long one, but now let's jump into the playback menu. I never delete anything from here. That's not something I do. Playback folder, all is always selected. Playback display options. So I like to know where my focusing point was. After that is mark first shot in a series. So if you're doing a quick burst or a big burst, it's going to put a indicator on the first picture so you know where that burst started. I don't leave that on at all. Additional photo info. I like seeing exposure info. I like shooting data, maybe the overview and maybe none. And file info, that's one that you could use too. So when I save this, I'm gonna go ahead and hit done down here, and I go back into the playback menu to play back an image. I go ahead and hit it. Now you can see that red square on the inside. That's where my focusing point was. If you get into this mode, right, and you're like, well, how do I get something else on the screen? You just hit the up arrow. You see how it's changing between info? That's how you rotate it. So this is all my other info. Then we've got this info, this info. A lot of this stuff isn't even needed, so I could turn most of it off. But you can see all of my settings are right here just by hitting up. Now to change images, I could swipe on it just like you do on an iPhone, or I can just hit the arrow keys over, which is just how most of us do it. And we could, hey, look, it's me, it's a selfie. Now, if I want to zoom all the way in, do I hit the OK button? Yep. I hit the OK button and we go 1-to-1 in. And then you could just move around the frame either by touching it, double tap on it, can bring you in and bring you out. We could hit up again and you could see all the different menu settings, and that's how you go through your images. I don't want to delete it, so I'm not going to delete on the camera personally, but those are your different playback options. Delete pictures from both slots. Wow, that's interesting. That's actually a good mode, that if you do delete pictures from the first card, it's going to delete the same picture from the second card. Don't delete on camera. I never delete. We have so much space so I don't do that. Next up is dual format recording playback slot. It's just asking you which card slot it would like you to playback from, either the SD or the CF Express. Filtered playback criteria, you could actually say just show me protected images, or ratings. If you rated them, it could just show you those. Series playback, I don't use this. Picture review, I leave off. This is when you take a picture. I don't want it to come on at all. If I want to review an image, I go ahead and I hit the playback button to do that. So I don't like the image automatically popping up, so it's nice to see that that's off by default here. After delete, this is what would happen after you delete an image. I don't do that. After burst show, nope, don't do this. Next up, we've got auto rotate pictures. Let me check something here. Let me go to the playback because I took a couple of verticals, some from the other one. There's a vertical. I don't like that it shows this on a horizontal display. I like it to auto rotate for the computer to come in properly, but I don't like viewing an image like that. So here, I turn that off, I go back to the play, and now I have to turn the screen to go vertical to view the image. I personally like this because it's more real estate. So I personally changed that. I don't know if that actually changes it on the computer. We'll have to fully test it out, but in the meantime, we could just leave it on. Copy images. This is if you want to copy certain images from one card to the next. So if you want all the starred images, this is actually pretty good. You could put that on the SD card, copying it from one to the other. And that takes us out of the playback menu into the setup menu. We've got format the card. Formatting a card is very important. This is what you do when you put a new card into the camera. You put a card into the camera, you format it, you tell it which slot. If you have one in both, you're going to format them both. You would go in here and you do full format, quick format, or no format. And just understand that if you format your card and you haven't saved your images, you are losing them all and they go bye-bye. They're very difficult to get back, especially if you delete a card and then shoot over it. So remember, only format the card after you've backed up your images. It's very important to do so. Save users settings or save user settings. So this is if you set the U1, the U2, and the U3 on the back of the camera, on the top of the dial. You would say for indoors or outdoors, you could set the settings there and quickly change from there. That's where you get those. Reset user settings, that would be to delete those. Language, obviously you can change the language. Time zone and date, this is where you go to set your time zone. Date and time, date format, and daylight savings you could turn on or off. I'm still confused by this. My brain just doesn't compute that. I know it sounds weird, but I just go in and change the time every time daylight savings happens, and I change it myself. So that's where you change that. Let me jump in here once again because I want to show you this photo taken with the Nikon Z6 III and edited with FroPack 4. Now, this isn't the normal photo that I would edit with all of these presets, but they look amazing. So let's start with Blue's Clues, followed by Brooklyn. Look how awesome that looks. C41 to give it that filmic old school look. We've got Copper Tone, DeLorean, High C, Kaleidoscope, Mel Brooks, Saltwater Taffy, Thick, and Wet Hot American Summer. Now, like I said, I don't normally do that for a sports photo like this, but they all looked incredible. Now, if you're looking for a way to support the channel and all of these free videos, especially the one you're watching right now that's almost 2 hours long and you didn't have to pay for it, this is the best way to support us. Not only does it help us out, but it's gonna give you a great starting point, whether you shoot RAW or JPEG. If you've never edited before, you can use it on the desktop for Lightroom, or you can even use them on mobile. That's why we created 14 all-new custom Lightroom presets that you can check out right now at FroKnowsPhoto.com/FroPack4. While you're over there, you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters, and if you decide to pick them up right now, they are currently on sale. Or you can save even more by getting the FroPack bundle that includes FroPack 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, let's get back to the video. Next up, we've got monitor brightness. Now, yours will not be at -3. I have it on -3 so that when Steven is recording the back of my screen, it's not overblown and over bright. So generally, it's going to be set to 0. Leave it to 0 because you don't want to change the monitor brightness. It might throw off your it just might throw you off a little bit. Monitor color balance, I don't change. Viewfinder brightness, I leave on auto so that if I'm in a dark area, it's going to darken it slightly, and if I'm in a bright area, it's gonna brighten it. And I like to do it on auto because this is where you could really mess up your exposure, because you might be like, oh, it's super bright, and then you might compensate for that, but it's because your viewfinder was too bright. So I don't change that at all. Viewfinder color balance, don't change that. Viewfinder display size, you've got standard and small. I like standard. Small is what you would do if you wear glasses and you want to just shrink the screen in your electronic viewfinder a little bit to make it easier. That's where you would do it. We've got auto rotate info display is on. That is great to have for when you go vertical. The info that's always on the bottom of the screen is always going to be on the bottom, whether you're horizontal or vertical. You've got AF fine-tuning options. Leave that off. Non-CPU lens data. This is if you're one of those older photographers or younger photographers that want to put manual lenses on. You would adapt it, and then you could tell it what lens it is. You've got distance in units is set to meters. Let's see. Save focus position off. Save position PZ lenses is off. Let's see, auto temperature, cutoff. These cameras can overheat. You could put it on high, but it will tell you the camera will become hot to the touch. Use a tripod or the like. That's funny. Use the tripod or a like. What is that, a thumbs up? Like, give this a like? I leave this on high. I don't know that you're gonna lose image quality personally. We do this so that we could record for longer amounts of time. Clean image sensor, this is if you have dust on the sensor, it's gonna shake it. I'm not gonna do it right now because it would ruin my recording right here. Image dust off, that's if there's, I never use this. I'm not even gonna say that. Pixel mapping, never. Image comment, this is where I would type in input my name. Why is this not a QWERTY keyboard? I don't know, but I would put in Jared Polin FroKnowsPhoto and I would hit save, and then I would do the same thing for copyright information. I would turn that on, put my name, put my copyright information. Whatever you want to put in here is going to be saved into your file. Nothing here. Voice memo options I don't use. Camera sounds. You can do shutter sound, different volumes, beeps on, beeps off, different pitches. I actually keep my cameras on silent at all times at this time when I shoot. Silent mode, if you're in silent mode, you can't use the mechanical shutter. So you're only going to be using the electronic shutter, but no other sounds will be had. I like to shoot silent these days. But the shutters aren't that loud, especially if you're in a loud situation. So just be aware of that. Touch controls are currently set to on. Let's see, enable, disable to touch controls, or glove mode. Glove mode, so if you're using gloves. HDMI settings for those plugging in, like we're plugged in, so we have those set. You have USB connection priority. Right now it should be set to upload, and then you could do for shooting. We've got assign remote. This one I keep on default. Conformity marking is just for, here, I'll show you. That's it. Like, that's for we don't even, that's not for us. Battery info is important. It shows us that my battery's now at 25% and I've only taken 16 shots. That's because we've had it on for about 4 hours while we record this video. USB power delivery means if you plug in via USB power, it will charge it. It is a great way to charge your camera. I do that all the time. Energy saving in photo mode, off, slot empty, lock. So you have the option to release lock, enable release. Yes. So if we don't have a card in the slot, it will not take a picture if you put it on lock. Honestly, this should be by default. So I put it on lock because I don't want to accidentally start shooting pictures without a card in the camera. That would be kind of like shooting pictures without film in the camera, which I did when I was younger, and it sucked because I then realized I took a bunch of pictures and didn't actually have any film in the camera. Save load settings are very important. After you're done setting up your camera, like we're doing right now, I would go ahead and hit save load. I would save the menu settings to the memory card, and then I will take that file on that card and email it to myself. I would say Nikon Z6 III, save load settings, so that I could always find it from anywhere in the world. If I ever need to reset it or set up a different Z6 III, I will always have that to go back to. That's important. Or if you want to send it to a friend for them to set a camera, they could do that. We're not going to reset all settings, and this is where we would see firmware and where we would update firmware when there are new firmware updates. This next menu is your network menu. I'm not going to go through this right now, but this is where you would set up your FTPs. This is where you would set up different network modes. You could connect to Nikon Imaging Cloud. This is a whole nother video unto itself, which I will not be making, but this is where you have your entire network settings. And then My Menu, which isn't that important anymore, but you can add specific items that you want to get to quickly, like, let's see, Setup Menu. What could I see? Oh, I want to get to Format Card quickly. I could do that and put Format Card right in there, and there it is, right in My Menu. So you can add things that you might not be able to get to quickly right here into My Menu, and that, my friends, that takes us through the majority of this video, which is how to set up your Z6 III, and there's only a few more things to get to. Now let me explain to you the icons you're gonna see on the back of the screen, but also when you look through the viewfinder. What I'm seeing and what you're seeing right now for me is the back of the screen because I can't record the viewfinder perfectly when we're showing you this. So let's start on the bottom left-hand corner. That is the metering mode. So that's showing you the matrix metering currently is set. To the right of that, you now have your shutter speed indicator. 1/60th of a second is where it's set. But as I showed you earlier, if I rotate this back dial to the left, it gets a slower shutter speed. Rotate it to the right, we get a faster shutter speed. So you can see how you can manually control that. To the right, you see your f-stop. Right now it's at 1.4. That's this front button, this front dial. I can't turn it left any further because if I turn it left, it stays at 1.4, that's what this is, an f1.4 lens. But if I want to go to a higher aperture, I rotate it to the right, and we can go all the way up. It's going to depend on what lens you have. This one goes to 16, some go to 22, some go to 32. So you can see that's how you change your aperture. Next to that, we've got our ISO. I showed you how to change that earlier. The 2200 means how many shots you have left, and we are shooting, as you see to the top, you've got RAW plus fine large full frame, which means 2200 shots. If we were shooting just JPEGs, you would see something like 18,000 or more photos that we could get. The I button, you would touch that. It's the same as hitting the I button on there. It brings up the I menu, so we can turn that off. What's blinking is your meter. I showed you how to use the meter earlier when I was showing you that if you line it up in the middle, it gives you this is your light meter. So if it's all the way to the bottom, it's showing us it's too dark. If we point it at this light here, you see how it's moving, and I want to line it up right in the middle, technically to give us our proper exposure. And that's what that is right there. As we move up along the right-hand side, as I just said, I'm shooting RAW plus fine large in full frame. You've got your picture style above that, which says SD, which with the star meaning that I made slight changes. We've got the D optimizer is off, that's to the left of that. We've got auto white balance 1, so you can see what white balance mode you have on. Now moving on to the middle of the frame, you can see that we've got auto selection for people or animals or subject to text, so it's going to auto-select that. With the full box that's showing up there, that means that it's all-encompassing autofocus. So if I change that by pressing F2 right now, you can see that 3D, and it can go through all the different boxes as you make those changes. To the left, we've got high speed, but not high speed plus. Manual, because we're set to manual. And then we've got view, which is showing us that we have the live view display showing us exactly what our exposure should be. Moving down the left-hand side, the A with the shutter means it's automatic shutter. It's going to select whether it's going to do mechanical, front curtain shutter, or electronic. The waving hand just means image stabilization, your vibration compensation, or your vibration reduction, your VR, is on. Then we have this touch button right here. I currently have this off, but as you touch around it, it's going to tell you what it will do. So that's touch to AF. These are worthless and useless. I would never use them, and I leave them off. That takes us around the outside of the camera as it pertains to when we're in stills mode. But next, I want to show you what it looks like when we get into video mode. Now I've switched this switch on the back of the camera from stills to video. And along the bottom, you can see on the bottom left, auto levels is selected. So it's going to control it, and I shouldn't ever go into the red mode. You can see that right there, that the levels are changing. We've got 1/16,000th of a second, shutter speed, f1.4. It's in auto ISO right now. You can see that we're running low on battery because our indicator is lit red, which means we're under 20% battery now. Right above that, info button once again. And then as we move up to the top right-hand side, that's where you see what frame rates you're on, what modes you're on. Are we full frame? Yes, full frame. So that will change depending on what settings you have. Your SD, so you can see that you're in standard with the changes that I made earlier. The auto optimizer is also off, but going above that, you can see that we've got 1 hour and 36 minutes of record time, and it's showing you that it's saving to the CF Express B card slot. As we move over, we've got auto white balance is set to auto white balance 1. You've got zeros on the clock because we're not recording, but if I hit the record button, it should count up. So let me hit record. There you go, and there's the red indicator box coming up, and you can see we've been recording for 4 seconds. I can hit the record button on top of the camera to stop that again. Right below the zeros on the screen, you have what focus mode we're on, so the focus box, followed by the AFF, which is the full-time autofocus. All the way to the left, we're in manual. As you go down, you've got your vibration reduction mode. It's showing us that it's on. Same thing with touch AF. I like to leave this off, and it's on matrix metering. So that is your info display as it pertains to video. Now that is a long video. That's a long video. If you got this far, leave a comment down below that I got this far. If you haven't already subscribed, please give us a subscribe because these are long but free videos, and the reason that I make these is to help you right off the bat get familiarized with the settings of your camera, the buttons of your camera, so that it gives you a jump start, the jump start that I personally didn't have when I started out. And so we appreciate your support when you watch this, and the best way you can support us is by signing up for my email list, which is over at FroKnowsPhoto.com. Just look for the orange box. You can put your name, email address in it, hit send it, and I'll send you a free guide to capturing motion in low light situations like I told you earlier. But that is the best way that you can thank us, is subscribe, thumbs up, sign up for the email list, and please check out all of the videos as they come out. Thank you very much for watching. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.